In his ornate council office, Mayor Charles Mackey pondered his next actions. What had got him to this point? Now he was planning the unspeakable. This would undoubtedly make or break him. 11 years in the position, running the town, his legal profession, marriage to Isabel, the 2 kids, they were all on the line here. He went back earlier in the week where he met Cantabrian visitor Darcy Creswell, the ne'er-do-well cousin of one of his clients. Their meal together, his reckless invite, a private tour of his pet project, the recently opened Sargent Art Gallery. How he pondered beside the reproduction Greek statue, The Wrestlers. Then the contra-postured man. Looking for signs, the handsome 24-year-old World War I veteran was gazing at their forms with similar mindset to himself. How they had ended back to the very office he was in 2 days ago, where he had foolishly produced a series of pornographic photos. Then it went all downhill. Not only had Darcy Creswell rebuffed his advances, he was now threatening to expose him as a homosexual, a pervert. Resign forthwith, or I will tell everyone. And desperate to comply, he had signed a confession Creswell had penned, pleaded to spare his wife and family, offered hush money. Creswell, the man standing in front of him, was still seemingly ambivalent. He had to stop him before he spilled the beans. Pulling a pistol from his office drawer, Mackey looked to bring the gun to his temple, feigning suicide before pointing it straight at Creswell and shooting, mockingly blurting, "This is for you." It was impossible for him to miss. The bullet struck him in the chest and immediately he collapsed, a bullet in his lung. Mackey had 2 options with the dead man now on his floor. Get out of the bind. He could turn the tables on to Creswell and tell the police it was him that came on to him, and that he did what any self-respecting heterosexual man would do faced with such advances. Or he could say simply Creswell took his own life, was utterly bonkers. He chose the latter, leant down and placed the pistol in Creswell's hand. Only Creswell wasn't dead. Although wounded and weakened, a wrestling match now occurred on the ground, befitting the aforementioned knock-off Greek statue. Now the stronger man, Mackey managed to extract himself and exit the office, locking it from the outside. Things for him had gone pear-shaped majorly. Meanwhile, Creswell had summoned enough strength to throw a chair through the second-story window to attract the attention of the public. Mackey now re-entered the room and begged Creswell to kill him. The police, however, was soon on the scene, and they were faced with a delicate situation. Here was a victim who, by his own admission, stated he had led Mackey on to make sure of his dirty intentions, homosexuality being illegal at the time. A want-to-be poet from out of town pointing the finger at a man who was the pillar of the community. On occasion kicked about with the Prime Minister. Explained away the bullet in the chest as an accidental discharge. Creswell had 2 major things on his side though. He was a returned soldier, and just 2 years after the war, this brought with it credibility, automatic local and national support for his account from those within the service fraternity. Above all, he still had the signed confession as to what led Mackey to pull the trigger. Why he would now carry a bullet in his lung for the rest of his life. Faced with the confession, Mackey knew he was on thin ice. Faced with the tricky one, if it was accidental, why would Creswell feel the need to throw a chair through a window? He now admitted to the crime, was up for attempted murder, social ostracisation. Inside the court, the defence presented a man who was struggling with his sexuality, told how he had previously sought medical treatment for his sexual orientation, While specifics of the treatment weren't presented, at the time homosexuality was considered a mental illness, leading one to think he went to a psychiatrist. The papers of the day savaged Mackie. In typical front foot stance, Truth magazine talked of his perverted and putrid pleasures. Then on the other hand tagged Creswell as the wholesome-minded young man who fought and got wounded for his country. If only they knew the real truth, the editor of the Namesake would have had kittens, and Creswell was gay himself. He was after all a poet, which is always a wee bit sus. Mackie got 15 years in the slammer. His old employers chiselled out his name from the foundation stone of the Sargent Art Gallery and dealt with the tricky issue of there being a Mackie Street in the town by simply changing it. Meanwhile, his wife Isabel began divorce proceedings and under her maiden name took a messy court case to strip him of all his assets, whilst he, at this stage, languished behind bars in a series of prisons. Looking at her, I think I would have done the time. 6 years later, he was released on good behaviour and for some strange reason extradited to the United Kingdom, perhaps a condition of his early release. His only supporter left was now his sister. Within a decade, the name Charles Mackie would once again be up in lights. His death in 1929, 3 years after his departure, made the front pages in New Zealand. He had ended up in the bohemian circles in Berlin as an English teacher and reporter for the newspaper, the Sunday Express. Their Berlin correspondent was out covering the communist rallies. These invariably ended up clashing with rival nationalist groups as well as the police. Riots is the term we are all looking for here. In the heart of the battle, it was the police that had accidentally shot the 54-year-old Mackie, the bullet, ironically, entering his chest. Before I move on from Mr. Mackie, I need to champion one of his pet projects, electric trams, as in the genuine battery EV. I've done a video on the glory days of electric vehicles on the roads in New Zealand, and that was 100 years ago. They are far from the revolutionary mode of transport they are championed today as. That photo on your screen of EVs en masse was taken in 1924 in Christchurch. For many, that photo will come as a big surprise. The realisation that EVs could actually be cool. Link in the description. And Creswell, what happened to him post Wanganui? The good money, after all, was he was bribing Mackie, who simply called his bluff in the form of a bullet to the bronchus. Well, he ended up in literary circles in London as a poet of sorts, hobnobbed with the likes of Frank Sargenson and the enigmatic Geoffrey de Montauk in England, and then back to NZ, and then back to England, all whilst largely living off his farming family's wealth. Had a sham marriage for a brief time, which produced a child. Amongst the mutual masturbatory daisy chain of literary circles, his poetry was revered. Come on, Paul, you've got them interested now, mate. Show them one of his oh-so-great poems. Alright, I'll do it, but somewhat reluctantly. First though, before I get to the sample verses, I think you probably need to see this.
Oh, friddled grunt Buckley.
No, really, you don't have to read. We put you through enough trouble already.
Plurdled gabbled nonsense on a learned bee.
Vogon poetry is widely accepted as the third worst in the universe. The second worst is that of the Asgoths of Krea. During a recitation by their poet master Grunthos the Flatulent of his poem Ode to a Small Lump of Green Putty I Found in My Armpit One Midsummer Morning, 4 of his audience died of internal hemorrhaging. And the president of the Mid-Galactic Arts Nobbling Council survived by gnawing one of his own legs off.
Oh.
Time to break out the hard liquor. Cresswell gassed himself in London, aged 64. His archaic prose is available in all bad bookshops. That's it, guys. Another one to go into the vault, in which there is, of course, that video on the heyday of electric vehicles in New Zealand. Thanks to all my subscribers and viewers alike. I love you long time. Be sure to similarly support all the small, non-mainstream independent channels you can on YouTube. For example, there's an Aussie version of this channel called Dark Corners of History. Check out the one he's done on the Golden Rule murder. Then there's Canadian History EHX, which is strangely from Canada. A good one is how Canada relinquished territory and got 100,000 tulips in return. I've put both those channels' names and links in the description below for you to check out. And cheers there, I will spot you next time. Bye for now.